Welcome to Islamicus, where faith meets the future. In a world driven by technology and constant change, we explore how timeless Islamic wisdom connects with the digital age. From AI ethics to spiritual mindfulness in modern life, we uncover how faith can guide innovation and how innovation can deepen our understanding of faith. Join us as we bring together thinkers, scholars, and storytellers, shaping a smarter, more soulful tomorrow.
So today we are tackling one of those really sprawling topics and building you a roadmap to understand what truly matters. We're doing a deep dive into the global landscape of Islam. And this isn't just about religion. We're looking at history, culture, and some of the immense institutional challenges these communities face today. The sources we've pulled for you here, they're incredibly wide-ranging. We have fresh demographic data, historical overviews of things like the Islamic Golden Age. But where it gets really compelling, I think, is the modern analysis. We've got these serious juridico-philosophical arguments about economic stagnation and then social studies on immigrant integration in, say, Western Europe.
Right. And that's so important because when people hear the Muslim world, they often just default to this single monolithic image. And that image, just completely misses the complexity, the dynamism you see globally. So our mission here is really to shatter that single viewpoint. We want to uncover the huge diversity out there and then zoom in on these specific hurdles, both internal and external, that these communities are navigating right now.
Okay, so let's start with just the sheer scale. Our sources say that as of 2020, there are 53 Muslim majority countries. And if you're like most people, when you hear that, you immediately picture the Middle East, maybe North Africa, the historical core.
But here's the curveball. If you actually look at the raw numbers, the largest concentrations of the world's Muslim population are in South and Southeast Asia. What's genuinely fascinating here is that the largest single national Muslim population is Indonesia.
Indonesia?
Yes, Indonesia. It accounts for about 12.2% of the global total.
Wow. So it's the single largest ahead of all the traditional centers.
Absolutely. And then you have Pakistan, which is clocking in at nearly 11.8%, and India, which is a massive data point in itself, at 10.9%.
And Bangladesh is up there too, right?
Bangladesh is 9.2%. So you put that all together, that's nearly half the world's Muslims living in a region that's geographically pretty far from the Arabian Peninsula.
And that right there, that should immediately tell you that the Muslim experience is just so localized. It's incredibly diverse.
Exactly. And that diversity extends right into politics and theology. We're not talking about one single governing structure.
Right.
The denominational splits are the first thing to look at. The Sunni branch is, of course, the overwhelming majority, over 75%. Shia populations are somewhere between 10 and 20%, mostly concentrated in places like Iran, Iraq, Azerbaijan. Then you get these smaller but really distinct branches, like the Ibadi, which is actually the majority in Oman, about 75% of their population.
And how does that fragmentation map onto the governments themselves?
Well, it gets even clearer there. You can basically categorize Muslim majority states into three groups. You have 8 that are official Islamic states like Saudi Arabia or Iran, where law and state are completely intertwined. Then you have 17 that endorse Islam as the state religion, but they have largely secular legal codes for civil life. Think Egypt or Malaysia.
Okay.
And then, and this might be surprising, there are 25 that are officially secular states. And that includes major players like Turkey, Indonesia, and Albania.
So when we talk about governance in the Muslim world, we are clearly not talking about a single political project.
Not even close.
Okay, so that really sets the stage for the present. But to understand that, we have to go back. Let's talk history, let's talk culture. The whole story really starts with the first revelation to the Prophet Muhammad around 610 CE. But the definitive starting point, the one that kicks off the Islamic calendar, the AH, is the Hijra, the migration to Medina in 622.
In that initial period of expansion, it just led into this breathtaking height of global influence. We're talking about the Islamic Golden Age, usually dated from around 786 to the mid-13th century. What was happening in places like Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba. It was just incredible.
They weren't just preserving old texts, they were building on them.
Exactly. It was all about synthesis. They were systematically gathering, translating, and synthesizing knowledge from, well, everywhere. Greek philosophy, Roman engineering, Persian literature, Indian mathematics.
And the economic power that came with that.
Oh, the economic peak was staggering. If you fast forward a bit through the gunpowder empires, the Mughals, Safavids, Ottomans, you get these moments of just complete dominance. Here's a data point from the sources that it genuinely shocked me.
Go on.
During the 17th and 18th centuries, Mughal India was valued as the world's largest economy. It accounted for a quarter of the world's entire GDP.
25%.
25%.
To put that in perspective for you, that's about the same economic weight that the United States has today. We're talking about a foundational economic superpower.
It completely reframes the whole discussion, doesn't it?
It really does.
And culturally, the contributions were just as foundational. In science, you had figures like Ibn al-Haytham, who's basically the father of optics. He proved that light enters the eye rather than being emitted by it. Changed everything.
And then there's Al-Khwarizmi.
Right, Al-Khwarizmi. His work gave us fundamental theorems in algebra, log-based systems. His name is even the origin of the word algorithm.
And we have to mention Avicenna's medical text, the Canon of Medicine. It was so advanced that it was the standard authoritative medical textbook in European universities until the 18th century.
I mean, that's just incredible staying power. And you see that same rigor in the art and architecture.
Because of the prohibition on depicting God or the prophet.
Right.
Like aniconism.
Precisely. The focus had to shift.
Yeah.
If you can't represent a divine figure, you use mathematics and geometry to represent divine perfection.
That's a classic case of constraint forcing brilliance.
Absolutely. And it led to these stunningly intricate designs like arabesque and the famous Giri patterns. And here's what's wild. Our sources note some of these Giri patterns use complex decagonal quasicrystal geometry.
Which is a mathematical concept that wasn't formally discovered in the West until
Centuries later. Yeah.
Philosophically, too, it seems like the Golden Age really laid the groundwork for the Enlightenment. I'm thinking of that novel, Hayam and Yakon.
Yes, by Ibn Tufail. A book set on a desert island that explores empiricism, tabula rasa, the blank slate idea. And many think it was a potential inspiration for Robinson Crusoe. It just shows you how deeply interwoven the world's intellectual progress was at that time.
It's amazing. And all of that history is still present today, even in something as simple as the calendar.
Right. You have the lunar hijri for religious rituals, and the solar hijri, which is based on precise astronomical calculations, and it's the official calendar in Iran. That sort of gives you the whole historical frame right there.
So we've seen this incredible intellectual and economic reach. But when we fast forward to the modern era, something just fundamentally shifts. You see this long divergence where many Muslim-majority nations have fallen behind economically. What do the sources say caused this? What broke?
Well, the sources present a really challenging, almost internal critique. They point to a long divergence that has its roots way back in the Middle Ages. And they attribute this stagnation largely to what they call the retrograde outlook of the religious legal class, the fuqaha or the jurists.
So the argument is that the religious establishment itself essentially put the brakes on everything.
That is the core of the argument, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the specific legal issue that they say is at the center of the problem is the prohibition of riba.
Okay, so riba, that's usually translated as interest or usury, right?
It is.
Why would banning interest be so catastrophic that it halts an entire civilization's economy?
Because the jurists focused only on the literal meaning of riba, which is simply increase or growth, and they just prohibited it rigidly. They completely missed the underlying economic reason for the prohibition, the philosophy behind it, the ikma.
And what was that underlying reason?
It wasn't about stopping capital growth. It was about protecting property rights, preventing expropriation by the powerful, and maintaining financial stability.
So by taking it literally, they created this static, inflexible legal system.
Exactly. It's like trying to run a modern economy on a computer operating system that hasn't been updated since the year 1000. It just can't handle the complexity.
So what happens when the law is rigid, but the economy needs to evolve?
People invent workarounds. They started using oya, which are essentially legal ruses, legal tricks, to get around the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And the sources give a perfect modern example. The banking murabah, which is a type of credit sale in Islamic finance. It's basically an inefficient medieval financial tool that was legalized through this process of finding loopholes, instead of creating something dynamically modern.
So the workaround actually institutionalized inefficiency, and this legal stagnation, it seems like it fused with the political power structures of the time.
Absolutely. The ruling elites, they historically got their legitimacy from the religious scholars. So by co-opting the jurists, they legitimized their own autocratic rule and, critically, the expropriation of wealth by a very narrow elite. The economic failure was tied directly to the political failure.
Is there hard data to back that up?
There is. The sources looked at occupational dynamism. Between the years 701 and 1500, the number of distinct commercial jobs stayed completely flat. The market just stopped innovating. But in that same period, jobs in the bureaucracy, the military, law, religion, they more than tripled or even quintupled.
So the productive commercial sphere stagnated while the non-productive state sector just exploded.
A classic loss of organizational dynamism.
The lesson there seems pretty clear. A healthy economy needs dynamic institutions, not just resources.
Precisely. And the sources argue that for any sustained advancement, a new dynamic ijtihad is needed. An approach that integrates modern social sciences, like financial economics, to really get at the deeper objectives of the law, the hikmah, and fosters political institutions with checks and balances. Without that intellectual reform, the divergence continues.
Okay, so let's shift from the internal pressures of majority nations to the social challenges facing Muslim minorities in the West. Let's use a place like France as a lens. Demographically, the Muslim population in Europe, if you exclude the Balkans, is estimated to be at least 20 million people. The vast majority are immigrants or their children.
And this creates what the sources call a bitter conflict between two concepts, identity and integration. Identity is defined as, a stable set of characteristics, language, culture, religion. Integration, on the other hand, often implies conformity, a kind of fusion with the host society.
And when those two things clash, immigrants are faced with an impossible choice.
That's the core of the problem. They basically have two difficult options.
Yeah.
You can withdraw into isolation and distance yourself from the broader community.
Which leads to marginalization.
Exactly. Or you abandon your cultural and religious values and try to melt into the dominant culture, which the sources call a state of alienation within alienation.
And the barriers to integration are very real.
Oh, they're substantial. Language, differences in customs, religious prohibitions on things like alcohol or certain foods, and then critically, the high unemployment and social exclusion that a lot of Muslim youth feel in some European suburbs.
And this already difficult path was it was politicized and made so much worse after 9/11.
Yes. The geopolitical tension fueled a lot of Islamophobia, and it focused media attention heavily on these very visible religious markers, like the hijab or the construction of mosques. And that intensity, it often arouses fear in host societies, which makes the path to moderation much, much harder for the majority of the community just seeking to live peacefully.
So is there a proposed path forward that isn't just conform or be isolated? Is there a middle ground?
There is. The sources say that traditional restrictive integration policies often fail. They lead directly to more isolation. This suggested alternative is something called positive integration, participation in coexistence without demanding a complete fusion.
So you can converge on shared civic values while still maintaining some cultural privacy.
Exactly, as long as you're not violating civil law. The problem, though, and we have to note this, is that this delicate process is made much harder by the presence of hardline political Islamic groups.
You're talking about groups like the Muslim Brotherhood.
Or those inspired by them? Yes. Groups that actively seek to Islamize Europe. That ambition creates huge political friction, and it complicates things for the entire community because it seems to confirm the very fears that the host society often has.
We have covered a remarkable amount of ground today. I mean, we started with the sheer complexity and diversity of the Muslim world, stretching so far beyond its traditional core with this incredible historical economic power.
And then we explored the twin pressures that these communities are facing right now. First, that internal institutional failure that's contributing to economic stagnation, rooted in a really static interpretation of commercial law.
And second, that external identity struggle, especially in the West, centered on the tension between maintaining an identity and integrating into a host society. If you look at the long-term trajectory here, the challenge of intellectual reform just seems to be the ultimate determinant. The future stability and advancement of Muslim communities globally feels like it's intrinsically tied to the ability of the religious establishment to engage in a truly dynamic ijtihad, to move away from rigidly following medieval jurisprudence and instead actively guide their communities through these incredibly complex modern challenges.
A provocative thought, then, for you to take away from this. If the failure of the medieval jurists was their inability to integrate economic reasoning into their interpretations, how might the mandatory integration of modern financial economics and social sciences into traditional religious education fundamentally reshape the political and economic trajectory of these nations over the next century?
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.